The bustling lobby of Maxwell Industries gleamed with its usual morning activity. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the shine of marble floors and chrome fixtures. At the center of this corporate whirlwind sat Lily Chen, her fingers dancing across her keyboard as she juggled phone calls and welcomed visitors with a warm smile that had become a familiar comfort to everyone who walked through those grand glass doors. For 3 years, Lily had been the face of Maxwell Industries, greeting CEOs and delivery workers with the same genuine kindness. While others saw just another receptionist, she took pride in being the heart of the company's daily operations. She knew everyone's coffee preferences, remembered birthdays, and could sense when someone was having a rough day. What no one realized was that behind her professional demeanor lay dreams she'd carefully tucked away. That ordinary Tuesday morning shifted into something extraordinary when Richard Maxwell, the company's billionaire CEO, stepped out of his private elevator. Unlike his usual brisk walk to his office, he paused at Lily's desk. She noticed something different in his expression, was that uncertainty in the eyes of New York's most confident businessman. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell," Lily said, already pulling up his schedule on her screen. "Your 9 a.m. with the board has been moved to the conference room on the 40th floor due to the renovations." "Thank you, but that's not why I'm here," he replied, adjusting his perfectly knotted tie. The simple gesture betrayed a hint of nervousness that caught Lily's attention. "I have a rather unusual request." The office around them hummed with activity, but in that moment, everything seemed to slow down. Richard Maxwell, the man whose net worth could buy small countries, cleared his throat and continued, "The annual Children's Education Charity Gala is this Saturday. My usual guest had to fly to London for an emergency board meeting, and I find myself in need of company." Lily blinked, certain she had misheard. Was he suggesting what she thought he was? "I've noticed how well you handle our high-profile clients and your natural grace under pressure," he continued. "Would you consider attending the gala with me? As my guest, of course. All expenses covered." The busy lobby suddenly felt very quiet. A few nearby employees poorly disguised their eavesdropping, pretending to be deeply fascinated by their phones. Lily could practically feel the weight of their curiosity. I'm honored, Mr. Maxwell," she managed to say, her mind racing. "But surely there are more suitable choices. Perhaps someone from the executive team." He shook his head, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I need someone genuine, someone who can make our guests feel welcome without playing corporate politics. Besides, I've seen how you handle difficult situations with such natural ease. The gala could use your touch." As Lily considered his words, she caught glimpses of other employees watching their interaction. There was Mrs. Thompson from accounting, not so subtly adjusting her glasses for a better view, and Mr. Papel from legal, who had been pretending to read the same newspaper page for the past 5 minutes. "The gala supports music education programs for underprivileged children," Richard added softly, and something in Lily's expression shifted. He couldn't have known how those words would resonate with her, stirring memories she kept carefully hidden. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, Lily straightened in her chair and met his gaze. "I would be happy to attend, Mr. Maxwell. Thank you for the invitation." His face brightened with genuine pleasure. "Excellent. My assistant will send you all the details and arrange for everything you need." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Lily, please call me Richard, at least for the gala." As he walked away, the lobby erupted into barely contained chaos. Phones buzzed with rapid-fire texts, and whispered conversations sprouted like wildflowers after rain. Lily sat at her desk, outwardly calm, but internally reeling from what had just happened. She glanced at her reflection in the computer screen, the simple blue blazer, her neat but modest hairstyle, the practical shoes beneath her desk. By Saturday, she would be entering a world of designer gowns and diamond necklaces, of people who casually discussed vacation homes and private jets over champagne. Friday evening found Lily sitting at her small kitchen table was that this invitation wasn't just stepping into a new social circle delivered to her apartment. It was stepping back into a world Lily had delicate beating while her mother's old radio forced herself to leave behind softly in the background. As she turned back to her computer, piano she couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected invitation Lily's fingers unconsciously began moving in familiar patterns across the table's surface. A second chance at something she had lost long ago. Her mother called from her favorite armchair, where she sat wrapped in a warm blanket despite the mild spring evening. Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but knowing. "You always play along when you are nervous." Lily quickly pulled her hands back into her lap. "I didn't even realize," she admitted with a small laugh. "Old habits die hard, I guess." Her mother's eyes crinkled with understanding. 10 years of concert training doesn't just disappear overnight. She adjusted her position, moving carefully to manage her chronic pain. "Have you told your boss about your background?" "No," Lily shook her head, getting up to make her mother's evening tea. "And I don't plan to. That's not who I am anymore, Mom. I'm just a receptionist who's been asked to attend a fancy party." A receptionist who graduated top of her class from the National Conservatory of Music, her mother corrected, accepting the steaming cup with grateful hands. Who won 3 international competitions before she turned 18. Lily busied herself with adjusting the dress on its hanger. And who gave it all up to work a regular job with steady income and good health insurance, she finished firmly. "I don't regret my choice." The truth was more complicated than either of them said out loud. 5 years ago, when her mother's condition had worsened and the medical bills started piling up, Lily had faced an impossible choice. Continue pursuing her dream of becoming a concert pianist with its uncertain income and demanding travel schedule, or find a stable job that would allow her to care for her mother. The decision had broken her heart, but not her spirit. She glanced at the upright piano pushed against the living room wall, its keys silent but well maintained. She still played, but only at home, only for herself and her mother. The grand concert halls and prestigious music festivals of her past felt like scenes from someone else's life now. A notification pinged from her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was an email from Richard Maxwell's assistant with final details for tomorrow night. The gala would be held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with a guest list reading like a who's who of New York's elite. Lily's stomach did a nervous flip. What if someone recognizes me? She wondered aloud, voicing her deepest fear. The music world isn't that big, and this is a charity event for music education. Her mother set down her tea with a decisive clink. "Then they recognize you. You haven't done anything wrong, Lily. Choosing family over career isn't something to be ashamed of." Lily walked to the piano, lifting the lid and pressing one key softly. The note rang clear and true in their small apartment. "I just don't want anyone's pity. And I definitely don't want Mr. Maxwell to think I took this job under false pretenses." "Richard," her mother corrected with a small smile. "He asked you to call him Richard, remember?" Lily groaned, closing the piano lid. "That makes it even worse. Everyone at the office is already talking. Did you know someone started a betting pool about whether he's secretly in love with me?" Her mother laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Well, are you secretly in love with him?" "Mom." Lily protested, but she was laughing too. "I barely know him. He's my boss, and this is just a business arrangement. He needed someone appropriate to accompany him to a charity event, that's all." She returned to the dress, running her hands over the smooth fabric. The designer label made her wince. It probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. Tomorrow night, she would step back into a world she'd left behind, but in a completely different role. No longer the rising star pianist, but the humble receptionist on the arm of one of New York's most eligible bachelors. As she prepared for bed that night, Lily could hear her mother playing the piano softly. Her arthritis allowed it on good days. The familiar melody of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata drifted through their apartment, and Lily's fingers moved against her bedsheet, muscle memory too ingrained to ignore. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight, in the quiet of her home, she was still that girl who had once made music that moved people to tears. What she didn't know was that tomorrow night would test every boundary she'd carefully built between her past and present lives, and that the simple act of accepting an invitation to a gala would set in motion events that would change everything. The Metropolitan Museum's grand staircase glowed in the evening light, each step seeming to sparkle beneath the carefully placed spotlights. Lily sat in the back of Richard Maxwell's luxury car, trying to remember how to breathe. The emerald dress suddenly felt too tight, too exposed, too everything. "We can sit here for a moment if you'd like," Richard offered, noticing her nervousness. He looked impossibly handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, somehow even more impressive than his usual business suits. Lily straightened her shoulders, remembering her mother's words from their morning phone call. "You've performed in front of thousands. This is just another kind of performance." She turned to Richard with a small smile. "I'm ready." The car door opened, and the flash of cameras momentarily blinded her. Richard stepped out first, then extended his hand to help her. The moment Lily's heels touched the red carpet, she felt something shift inside her. Her body remembered a different kind of spotlight, a different kind of stage, and naturally fell into the poise that had once been as natural as breathing. "Who is she?" The whispers started immediately. Lily could hear them clearly, could see the phones discreetly pointing their way, but she kept her focus on walking gracefully beside Richard, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "That's their receptionist." Someone hissed, loud enough to be heard. "Can you believe it?" Richard's hand covered hers on his arm, a subtle gesture of support. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured. "Just ignore them." At the top of the stairs, a woman in a stunning red dress blocked their path. Even before Richard tensed slightly, Lily knew this must be Catherine Williams, his former fiancée. The society papers had spent months speculating about their broken engagement last year. "Richard, darling." Catherine's voice carried just the right note of surprise, as if she hadn't been watching their approach for the last 5 minutes. "I didn't expect to see you with company." "Catherine," Richard nodded politely. "You remember Lily Chen from the office?" Catherine's perfectly made-up eyes widened slightly. "The receptionist. How unexpected." She turned to Lily with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I love your dress, dear. It's so brave of you to wear something so noticeable." Before Lily could respond, a distinguished-looking older gentleman approached their group. "Richard, just the man I wanted to see. And who is this lovely young woman?" "Mr. Chen, meet Dr. Harrison Porter, head of the Children's Music Education Foundation." Richard made the introduction smoothly. "Dr. Porter, this is Lily Chen." Something flickered in Dr. Porter's eyes as he heard her name. Chen, not related to Ming Chen, the renowned violin instructor. Lily felt her heart skip a beat. "My mother," she admitted quietly. Catherine's eyebrows shot up, and even Richard looked surprised. "Good heavens!" Dr. Porter beamed. "I had the pleasure of watching her perform with the Philharmonic years ago, before her retirement. A remarkable talent. She's teaching privately now, I understand." "She had to retire due to health issues," Lily explained carefully. "But yes, she still teaches a few students when she's able." Catherine inserted herself back into the conversation. "How fascinating. And did you inherit any of your mother's musical ability?" The question hung in the air like crystal about to shatter. Lily could feel Richard watching her with new interest, waiting for her answer. But years of performing had taught her how to keep her expression pleasant and composed. "Music has always been a part of my life," she answered diplomatically, "though I chose a different path." Just then, the dinner chime sounded, saving her from further questions. As they made their way into the grand hall, Lily could feel the weight of curious stares. She had expected to be looked at as the receptionist who somehow caught her boss's attention. She hadn't prepared for questions about her past. The hall itself was breathtaking, transformed into a winter wonderland with crystal decorations and soft blue lighting. A magnificent grand piano stood on a raised platform at one end of the room, waiting for the evening's entertainment. Lily deliberately turned her back to it as Richard led her to their table. "You continue to surprise me," he said softly as he held her chair. "I had no idea about your mother." Lily smoothed her dress, buying time to compose her thoughts. "There's a lot people don't know about me, Mr. Maxwell." "Richard," he corrected gently, "remember?" She met his gaze and saw genuine curiosity there, not the calculation she was used to seeing in the office. "Richard," she agreed. "Yes, there's quite a lot you don't know about me." As the first course was served, Lily could feel the evening balanced on a knife's edge. Catherine kept shooting calculating looks their way. Dr. Porter was clearly bursting with more questions about her mother and Richard. Richard was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What none of them knew was that the real surprises of the evening were yet to come, and that the grand piano sitting silent in the spotlight would soon play a bigger role than anyone could have imagined. The main course had just been cleared when Dr. Porter stood to make an announcement, his face showing barely concealed distress. Lily watched as he consulted quietly with Richard, their expressions growing more serious by the moment. Around them, the elegant dinner continued, crystal glasses clinking and soft laughter floating through the air, but something was clearly wrong. Richard squeezed her hand under the table. "There's a problem," he whispered. "The evening's entertainment. The young pianist we sponsored from Juilliard, his mother just had an accident. He's on his way to the hospital." Lily's heart clenched with sympathy. "Is she all right?" "We think so, but obviously he can't perform tonight." Richard ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "This event raises millions for music education programs. The performance is meant to demonstrate exactly what these children can achieve with proper training and support." Around them, people were beginning to notice something was amiss. The grand piano stood silent on its platform, looking almost accusatory under the spotlight. Catherine, seated at a nearby table, was watching the situation unfold with poorly disguised satisfaction. "Couldn't you just play some recorded music?" someone suggested. Dr. Porter shook his head. "The whole point is to show live performance. These children learn to perform in front of audiences, to handle pressure, too." He continued speaking, but Lily had stopped listening. Her eyes were fixed on the piano, memories flooding back unbidden. She remembered her first recital at age 7, her knees shaking but her fingers steady. Her last performance, 5 years ago, before she'd packed away her dreams along with her concert dresses. Her mother's voice that morning. "Music has a way of finding you when you need it most." Before she could second-guess herself, Lily stood up. The motion caught Richard's attention immediately. "Lily?" he asked, confusion clear in his voice. She took a deep breath. "I can play." The conversation at their table stopped abruptly. Catherine let out a small, derisive laugh. "You mean like a little Mozart piece?" "Dear, this is the Metropolitan Museum of Art, not a school recital." Dr. Porter looked at her with new interest. "You're Ming Chen's daughter. Do you play at your mother's level?" Lily lifted her chin slightly. "I was the youngest finalist at the International Piano Competition in Vienna before I..." She paused, then continued more quietly, "before I had to stop performing." Richard stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because that's not who I am anymore," she answered simply. "But tonight, if it would help." Dr. Porter was already nodding enthusiastically. "What can you play?" "We had young Mr. Wu scheduled for Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. A small smile touched Lily's lips. "That was actually my competition piece in Vienna." She could feel the weight of everyone's stares as she stood. Richard caught her wrist gently. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "No one expects you to." "I know," she cut him off with a gentle smile. "That's exactly why I want to." As she made her way to the piano, she could hear the murmurs following her. The spotlights felt familiar on her skin, awakening muscle memories she thought she'd buried years ago. She adjusted the piano bench with practiced ease, noting with approval that the instrument was a Steinway and Sons Concert Grand, perfectly maintained. Running her fingers lightly over the keys, Lily closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she could see her mother at their small, upright piano, showing her how to position her hands when she was just a little girl. She could hear her teacher's voice. "Music isn't about the notes you play, it's about the story you tell." What story would she tell tonight? Looking out at the sea of faces, Richard's encouraging smile, Catherine's skeptical smirk, Dr. Porter's hopeful expression, Lily realized this wasn't just about saving the evening's entertainment. This was about all the roads not taken, all the choices that led her here, and maybe, just maybe, about finding a new path forward. She placed her hands on the keys, took one final deep breath, and began to play. The first notes of Tchaikovsky's concerto filled the grand hall, and in that moment, everything else faded away. She was no longer the receptionist who had surprised everyone by attending the gala. She was simply Lily Chen, telling her story through music, one note at a time. What happened next would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone in that room. As her fingers danced across the keys, Building toward the piece's dramatic first movement, Lily had no idea that this impromptu performance would set in motion events that would reshape her future in ways she never could have imagined. The first notes filled the grand hall like drops of rain before a storm. Lily's fingers moved across the keys with the certainty of someone coming home after a long journey. The opening chords of Tchaikovsky's concerto thundered through the space, commanding attention, demanding to be heard. At first, there were still whispers, the soft clink of cutlery being hastily set down, the rustle of silk dresses as people turned in their seats. But as the music swelled, filling every corner of the vast room, the whispers died away. Even the servers stopped in their tracks, wine bottles suspended mid-pour. Richard sat transfixed, his eyes never leaving Lily's form at the piano. This wasn't the quiet, efficient receptionist who managed his schedule and greeted his clients. This was an artist, a performer who shaped emotions from ivory and string. He watched as she swayed slightly with the music, her emerald dress catching the spotlight, her face transformed by complete absorption in the piece. At a nearby table, Catherine's smirk had frozen, then slowly melted away. She lifted her wine glass to her lips, but her hand trembled slightly, causing the red liquid to ripple. Dr. Porter was leaning forward in his chair, tears gathering in his eyes as Lily's interpretation brought new life to a piece he'd heard hundreds of times before. The music built and built, like waves growing larger before crashing against a shore. Lily's hands flew across the keys, drawing out melodies that soared and dipped, telling stories of triumph and longing, of choices made and paths not taken. Her body moved with the rhythm, completely at one with the instrument. An elderly gentleman in the front row closed his eyes, transported back to a concert hall in Vienna where, decades ago, he'd heard this same concerto played by the great masters. But there was something different here. A raw emotion, an urgency that spoke of 5 years of silence, of music bottled up and finally released. In the kitchen, the staff had stopped their work, standing in doorways to listen. A young dishwasher pulled out his phone, recording the performance with shaking hands. This wasn't part of the planned entertainment. This was something real, something extraordinary happening right before their eyes. As Lily reached the most challenging part of the first movement, her fingers dancing through the complex runs with seemingly impossible speed and precision, a collective breath was held throughout the room. The notes cascaded like stars falling from the sky, each one perfect, each one necessary, each one telling part of her story. Richard found himself holding his breath too, his heart racing as if he were the one performing. He thought of all the mornings he'd walked past her desk, all the meetings she'd scheduled, all the clients she'd greeted. How many times had he looked right through her, seeing only what she allowed the world to see? The music softened for a moment, becoming tender, almost like a lullaby. Lily thought of her mother, probably sitting at home right now, maybe listening to this very piece on their old radio. She poured all her love, all her gratitude into the notes. This performance wasn't just for the gala, it was for every sacrifice her mother had made, every dream they'd both put aside. Then came the triumphant return of the main theme, and Lily's hands moved with renewed purpose. The music filled the space completely now, wrapping around each person in the room like a spell. A woman at the back dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. A young waiter stood perfectly still, 3 plates balanced on his arm, forgotten in the moment. As she approached the movement's conclusion, Lily felt something shift inside her. The wall she'd built between her past and present was crumbling, note by note. She wasn't just playing the piano, she was rediscovering a part of herself she'd tucked away, kept safe but silent for far too long. The final chords rang out, powerful and decisive, echoing through the hall. For a moment, complete silence fell. It was as if everyone in the room had forgotten how to breathe, caught in the lingering magic of what they'd just witnessed. Then the applause began. It started slowly, almost tentatively, then built into a thunderous roar. People rose to their feet, some calling brava, while others simply stood in awe. Dr. Porter was openly weeping now, his hands clasped together in joy. Lily opened her eyes, coming back to herself slowly, like waking from a dream. She saw Richard standing with the others, a look of wonder on his face that made her heart skip a beat. Even Catherine had risen, her expression a complex mix of emotions. But it was the young dishwasher's face, peeking through the kitchen door with pure amazement, that brought tears to Lily's eyes. because she remembered being that young, that moved by music, that certain that anything was possible. As she stood to acknowledge the applause, her legs slightly shaky, she realized that this wasn't just a performance. This was a beginning. The applause had finally died down, but the buzz of excitement in the grand hall remained electric. Lily found herself surrounded by admirers, each eager to learn more about the mysterious pianist who had emerged from behind a reception desk. Her cheeks were flushed from the performance, and her hands still trembled slightly as she accepted congratulations from complete strangers. "That was absolutely magnificent," Dr. Porter exclaimed, pressing a business card into her hand. "We must talk about your involvement in our youth program. Such talent shouldn't be hidden away." Before Lily could respond, Catherine appeared at her elbow, her perfectly painted smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I simply must know," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "why someone of your obvious talents is working as a receptionist. It seems rather calculated, doesn't it? Getting close to Richard through such an ordinary position." The surrounding conversations quieted as people leaned in to hear Lily's response. Richard, who had been speaking with some board members, turned at the sound of his name. The weight of dozens of curious stares pressed in on Lily, reminding her of competition days, but this was different. This wasn't about music anymore. Taking a deep breath, Lily squared her shoulders. "Actually, I gave up performing 5 years ago. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one at the time." "But why?" someone in the crowd asked. "With talent like that?" "My mother got sick," Lily said simply, her voice quiet but clear. "She needed regular medical care, and more importantly, she needed me. Concert tours and international competitions don't exactly allow for consistent caregiving." Richard moved closer, his expression softening as he listened. Lily continued, finding strength in finally speaking her truth. "My mother, who some of you might know as Ming Chen, taught me that music is important, but family is everything. She gave up her own promising career to raise me, to nurture my talent. When she got sick, there was no question about what I had to do." She turned to face Catherine directly. "I didn't take the job at Maxwell Industries to get close to anyone. I took it because it offered good health insurance, regular hours, and the stability my mother needed. The fact that I'm standing here tonight, that I just played that piano, that wasn't part of some grand plan. It just happened." A gentle hand touched her arm, and Lily turned to find an elderly woman dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "My dear," she said softly, "I was at your last performance in Vienna. To think we might never have heard you play again." "Oh, but you have been hearing her," Richard suddenly spoke up, his voice warm with realization. "Every morning in the office, I'd hear humming from the reception desk. Little melodies while you worked. I always thought you just enjoyed music. I never imagined." The elderly woman gasped. "You hum Tchaikovsky while answering phones." A small laugh bubbled up from Lily's chest, releasing some of the tension. "Usually Bach actually. He's better for multitasking." The ripple of laughter that spread through the crowd felt genuine, understanding. Catherine's attempt to embarrass her had backfired, transforming instead into a moment of authentic connection with the very people she'd thought would judge her harshest. Dr. Porter cleared his throat. "You know, Ms. Chen, many of our students come from challenging backgrounds. They'd often have to choose between their art and their responsibilities. Having someone like you mentor them, someone who understands that struggle." "I couldn't possibly," Lily began, but Richard interrupted. "Why not?" he asked, his eyes alight with an idea. "Maxwell Industries has been looking to expand its community outreach programs. What if we partnered with Dr. Porter's foundation? We could create a music education initiative right in our building." Lily blinked in surprise. "In the building? We'd have that entire unused space on the 3rd floor," Richard continued, warming to the idea. "With some renovation, it could become a beautiful music studio. And who better to help develop the program than someone who understands both the corporate and musical worlds?" The crowd around them murmured approval, but Lily hesitated. "My mother's care. Your current position's benefits would remain intact," Richard assured her quickly. "This would be an expansion of your role, not a replacement. Besides," he added with a gentle smile, "I have a feeling your mother would be thrilled to see you making music again." As if on cue, Lily's phone buzzed in her small evening bag. She pulled it out to find a text from her mother. I can hear you playing from here. Your heart is singing again." Looking up, Lily met Richard's gaze. In his eyes, she saw not her employer, not the billionaire CEO, but someone who truly saw her, all of her, for the first time. Around them, the crowd waited expectantly, but this moment felt intensely personal, like standing on the edge of a new beginning. What happened next would change not just Lily's life, but the lives of countless young musicians who would find their way to that third-floor studio. But first, she had to take the step that would bridge her past and her future, bringing together all the pieces of who she was meant to be. 3 months after the gala, the third floor of Maxwell Industries had transformed into something magical. Where empty offices once stood, music now floated through renovated halls. Practice rooms lined one side, their walls filled with inspiring quotes and photos of young musicians at work. A small performance space occupied the center, complete with a baby grand piano that Lily had personally selected. On this particular morning, Lily stood in what had become her new office, adjusting the framed photo of her mother teaching a young student at their home piano. The wall beside it displayed the record-breaking donation amount from the gala night, nearly double their usual contributions, inspired by her unexpected performance. A knock at the door made her turn. Richard stood there, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him in the office, his tie slightly loosened, ready for the big day. Lily smoothed down her blazer, professional but comfortable enough to sit at a piano. "I think so, though I'm more nervous than I was at the gala." More nervous about teaching 5 kids than performing for hundreds of wealthy donors, Richard teased, stepping into the room. "These kids are why we're here," Lily replied, checking her lesson plans one last time. "Their families are juggling jobs, responsibilities, dreams, just like my mom did for me. I want to give them what she gave me, not just music lessons, but hope." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Through the glass walls, they could see the first group of students arriving with their parents. One little girl pressed her nose against the window of a practice room, her eyes wide at the sight of the gleaming instruments inside. "I still can't believe you did all this in 3 months," Lily said, watching the families gather. "The renovations, the equipment, the scholarships." Richard shook his head. "I just provided the space and resources. You're the one who designed the program, who insisted on including parent workshops and flexible scheduling. You understood what these families needed because you lived it." Their eyes met, and Lily felt that now familiar warmth in her chest. Over the past months, as they'd worked together to bring this project to life, their relationship had shifted. The boundaries between CEO and employee had blurred into something deeper, built on mutual respect and understanding. "Oh, before I forget," Richard pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Your mother's latest test results came in from the specialist we consulted." Lily took the envelope with trembling hands. The new treatment they discovered through Richard's medical connections had been showing promising results. She opened it quickly, scanning the contents, and let out a small gasp. "The numbers are all improving," she whispered, happy tears threatening to spill. "The doctor says she might even be able to teach again soon, if she feels up to it." Richard's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "I have a feeling we might need an experienced instructor for our advanced students soon." Before Lily could respond, Dr. Porter appeared in the doorway, beaming at the sight of students filling the hallway. "My dear, you've created something extraordinary here. A true bridge between 2 worlds." "Not just me," Lily said, squeezing Richard's hand back before letting go. "Everyone played their part. Even Catherine ended up donating a significant amount after seeing the program proposal." Speaking of playing parts, Richard added with a slight smirk, "I believe someone promised a duet at the opening ceremony." Lily laughed, remembering their late-night planning session when she discovered Richard had taken piano lessons as a child. He wasn't concert level by any means, but they'd found a simple piece they could play together, a symbol of their partnership in this venture. The clock struck 9, and excited chatter filled the hallway as families began moving toward the performance space. Lily took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked out to meet them. This wasn't a grand concert hall in Vienna, but somehow it felt even more important. She watched as the students found their seats, some shy, some bouncing with excitement. Their parents sat behind them, many looking tired from early morning shifts but glowing with pride. These were her people, Dreamers and doers, people who understood that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but that doesn't mean giving up on what matters. Richard stepped up beside her, their shoulders barely touching. In the audience, Lily spotted her mother in her wheelchair, looking stronger than she had in months, chatting animatedly with a student's grandmother about proper finger positioning. As Lily moved to the piano to begin the ceremony, she caught her reflection in its polished surface. She saw not just the concert pianist she'd been, or the receptionist she'd become, but someone new, someone who had found a way to be all of herself at once. The first notes of the opening piece filled the room, but this time Lily wasn't playing alone. As Richard joined her on the bench, their hands finding their places on the keys, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from grand solo performances, but from learning to play in harmony with others. And as their simple duet merged with the sound of applause, laughter, and excited whispers from their first class of students, Lily knew that all of this, was exactly where she was meant to be.